Welcome back, everyone, to the Way Between podcast. Welcome, Nick. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
So, just to give a little more background about Nick and I and our project here, Nick and I are a couple of PhDs in Asian comparative studies, and I've been working really on the philosophy side, whereas Nick has been working a lot on the religion side and also in the coaching side. Nick, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, my primary academic background is Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. And I always like to say like with a concentration in psychology. So when I was doing a lot of coursework, a lot of East-West type of contemplative psychology was there too. And then my professional work is as a leadership and transformation coach. So I do a lot of executive coaching, leadership development, that sort of thing. Yeah, so that's mainly my focus.
Yeah, and as far as I go, I was a philosophy undergrad. I tell the story often that, Socrates really opened my mind to the importance of philosophy. We'll probably get into that in a later episode. And then, from there, I saw the wisdom and value and daily life practice of Eastern philosophy. So I've been trying to work in academia. I had a few years at Sonoma State University teaching philosophy until they shut down the entire program. And now here we are, very happy to be with you all today. And last time we were talking about yin and yang energy, basically talking about how we can use those energies as sincerity and humility in our daily life. And I wanted to just go into a little bit about just a little thing for you to think about. Do you notice times when you're using humble energy? Do you notice times when you're using sincere energy? Remember, humble energy is obviously very calm, relaxing to help balance things out, and sincere energy is very active. I just wanted to kind of circle back on that before we move on today. Today, I wanted to go a different route and look at the origins of Indian philosophy. Last time we looked at the origins of Chinese philosophy, and we're always looking in this way between podcasts. We're always looking on how to connect philosophy into our daily life. The way between is really about the way between two people. And we'll look at this later, the character for humanity in Chinese philosophy. But the way between, honestly, is just meant to be the way between two people. So these can be two people from ancient times to modern. Sometimes words from Socrates or Confucius or Buddha resonate with us like tuning forks from ancient times to modern.
Hmm.
It could be way between two people from Eastern culture and Western culture that somehow resonates. It could be more significantly in your own life, your relationship, the way between two people is for Confucius, humanity, and it is our field of work in this life. So when we talk about the way between, it really is just the way between two people. Nick, do you have any thoughts on that before we move on?
No, it's interesting. I mean, in Buddhist tradition, especially, so a lot of what I talk about is Indo-Tibetan Buddhist tradition, as opposed to like Chan or Pure Land, but it's all sort of informed for sure. And I just think about the co-arising, or sometimes it's translated as like co-emergent, and it's like the object of awareness or the field of awareness and the awareness itself arises at one time, simultaneously. Whereas like the modern sort of materialistic version in the West is like, well, there's an object or a person out there, and then there's my awareness. And so when you say the way between, it's like, well, the co-arising or co-emergent properties of what it means to be in a relationship with anyone or anything, across distance or not, or time. It's co-emergent. And so it's like one thing is informing the other. Like the quality of the object that I'm engaging with or the person is also informing my awareness.
I love that. So we're diving into the deepest level right away, which is why I always love talking with Nick. Because when we talk about this, let's sit with this for a minute before we move on. I'm really thrilled to get into some of the Indo-Tibetan traditions with Nick today. But before we move on, I want to sit with this for a second because as you're speaking, basically what this describes is in Confucian philosophy as oneness. So
Hmm.
when you cultivate yourself to your highest level, when you understand your deepest humanity, that is actually heaven inside of you,
Hmm.
manifest as a human being.
Hmm.
When you understand this, then you can understand heaven as manifest in all beings, all things. You can understand that. And then you can understand them at their highest level. So this is like a kind of oneness. You have loyalty to that oneness and humanity and heaven inside of you, and you have deep empathy with that oneness and heaven and humanity in some other person. with another person, it's their humanity. With another thing, it's their heaven origin.
Mhm.
So I really love how you brought that out. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, it does go quickly when we chat about like to the essence of things. One way to think about it from sort of like a Dzogchen or Mahamudra perspective, which is so within Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, there are many different vehicles, or we could say like approaches to enlightenment, and all are equally valid. They just emphasize different things along the path. And so one way to think about them is like a ladder. One leads to the next, and the highest is usually considered the Dzogchen, which in Sanskrit is Maha-ati. Um, and Mahamudra, like the Great Seal, is the other one that's oftentimes talked about. And what in those frameworks, the way it's discussed is maybe a little more direct, which is like every thing and person and experience, everything that you can possibly conceive of is the interplay or the literal play, the display of awareness itself. And so there really ultimately is only like the display and awareness within. And it's like if you can realize that, then the entire world becomes a display of enlightenment.
Oh, okay, okay.
Automatically. Like we don't have to change it to anything. It's like we automatically experience it as that.
I love that. Can you say something about how we could relate that to daily modern life? I think it's something we should always kind of return back to
Yeah,
contextually.
I mean, it's those are pretty deep practice and philosophical elements. So, like in a real way, that is something that once you're introduced to the nature of mind, you can actually experience that. So they're not philosophical as such in the sense of like I'm reflecting on it, but where the philosophy comes in on it, it's like there's a kind of confidence or a trust in the divine nature of all the entirety of experience.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, how am I then messing up this divine experience? Like I'm categorizing it, or I'm pushing against it, or I'm pulling toward it too strong, or whatever. So you have like the five kind of negative emotions that drive what we call in Buddhism samsara, right? The being stuck in the illusion of reality.
Okay, okay, good, good. Very interesting. So I know a lot in Buddhism, you're meant to elevate out of samsara in a lot of ways, right? And break free through like a cycle of samsara. Is that?
Yeah, so samsara, like it means, so in Tibetan, the word literally means like going around in circles, right? Sipe Korlo. Like it means, so it's like a dog chasing its tail. And samsara just means ultimately like at the deepest level, like clinging to both an independent self, an illusory independent self, and a self of the world. So thinking that there's discrete objects out there and then I'm separate from that and all of that. And there is talk about like, do you transcend samsara and all of that stuff? Like you go beyond it. There is certainly talk about that. And you become an arhat, which is like a victorious one. And even Buddha himself transcended samsara. But actually, a more philosophical or deeper way to understand samsara is actually there was no samsara to begin with, right? Samsara itself is an illusion. So if you think that you need to transcend it, you actually are just reifying or making concrete the illusion further, right? So by saying like I need to get out of samsara is probably the fastest way to be more stuck in samsara.
Oh, I see. I see.
So it's sort of like if you think about an analogy for this would be like dreaming about something scary, like a wild elephant is the traditional example. Like if you have a dream of a wild elephant in your room, and you're like, well, how might I deal with this elephant? There's all kinds of dream ways. Like I can run away in the dream, I can get stronger in the dream, I can whatever it is. But actually, like the dream elephant was never there. So like when you wake up and it's like, where did the elephant go? The elephant didn't go anywhere. So like samsara is kind of like the elephant that once we
Uh,
wake up, there's nothing actually to transcend.
oh, very good. Okay, so I want to circle back to this. Like, I'd
Yeah.
like to go chronologically. And I know you and I took together a course with Dr. Jim Ryan about Indian philosophy and the very roots of Indian philosophy, going back to the Vedas.
Hmm.
And what I remember about it is it felt almost like wizardry. Like there were all these rites and all these different descriptions of practices and ceremonies that you perform. Does that sound familiar? Is that
Yeah.
part of
So like so Indian philosophy comes from the Vedas, right? And so it was so we use the modern term like Hinduism, wasn't actually invented until like a few hundred years ago. It used to be called like Brahmanical practices or Vedism or however you want to think about it. Or usually they were like sects divided through. But early days, the Vedas are largely ritual texts that also have wisdom in them. So they're ritual texts that were sort of chanted in a very specific way, and they were to do something. So to your point, like there was the ritual kind of wizardry component of it, and then within those texts there is the hidden nuggets of wisdom. And then it wasn't until about somewhere between 500, well, probably 1000 BC to 500 BC where the Upanishads came through. And the Upanishads were essentially like these writings that really took those nuggets of wisdom and really drew them out. And so those are the texts that you think of that are like very non-dual, very mystical. And there were teachers about that around that time that were like, yeah, look, we can teach you. There are tools and technologies that are sort of hidden in the ritual external element that we can then use as a meditation guide to attain these higher levels of states. And so that Upanishadic tradition is, I would argue, sort of how Buddhism brought itself out. So it was like a return to this wisdom, this non-dual wisdom type of teaching. There are lots of different flavors of it. And then Buddhism arose sort of from that. Like Buddha's mystical teachers in that lifetime were, I would say, Upanishadic teachers to some degree.
Oh, very interesting. So there's a few things that come to mind when you're talking about that. The first thing, I often go back to this book I mentioned before called Philosophies of India by Heinrich Zimmer.
Mhm.
But he makes a really interesting comparison that the Vedas are an example of high level thinkers that have done, they reach the highest level, they've done all they can with the outside world.
Mhm.
And the Upanishads is this shift where they
Mhm.
need to now turn their attention to the inside world. And he uses that as kind of analogy of where we were at his time around 1930s and 40s and 50s, I believe, where we had gone as far as we could in many ways technologically. Our sciences, our inventions were taking off, cars, automobiles, computers. It's the seed of where we are now. And
Mhm.
that in so many ways in Western culture, we had gone as far as we possibly could. The only thing left to explore is now our internal world. And then finding that our internal world is as vast and rich and has as much to discover as the entire outer world. So this is kind of a turn in mid-century modern times to reflect and actually very, very closely relates to postmodernism, the
Mhm.
hippie movement, and looking towards the East and looking towards psychology and these kind of things.
Yeah. I understand that categorization. I would push back a bit. So like not to say that it's wrong necessarily, but just like the sequentialism of it. So for instance, like the Vedas came from the rishis, and the rishis is just a Sanskrit term for sage, right? Sage or wise person, like the sage king. And they were very well attuned to the internal dynamics and realized beings in every tradition. Like even in Buddhism, there's like an acknowledgement that they are enlightened beings to some degree, right? And respected in that way. And so I would say that the Vedas were created to create social harmony and order and overall benefit for the person, certainly external. So the focus is external, but within the Vedas, there has always been an unbroken stream of the internal. And it wasn't until it just became like a little bit more popularized. And so maybe that's the thing of like the focus from the external to the internal. It became more popularized as people had more of a hunger for it. And then one thing led to another. I mean, even now, like in modern Buddhism, it's amazing. I've been practicing Buddhism for a long, like 20, 30 years almost. And actually 30 years to the day. And it used to be like many teachings now that are more accessible used to be completely hidden in secret. Like many people didn't even know the name, like complete secrecy. And then I think as American or as the West has sort of matured in practice, and there are many mature Western practitioners, those teachings have become more accessible and people have more hunger. Now, there's a danger to that, a downside to that, which is like, oh, they can become watered down, they become popular, which I think you do see some of that. But I also think like now's the time, right? So I suppose it is a movement from internal to external, and then sort of a reform, and then a coalescing around different sects or different schools that had particular ways of doing things. Oftentimes, like there was agreement in the beginning. So there were 18 major schools of Buddhism, and mostly in agreement, right? Still, even to this day, mostly in agreement. But then there is a different emphasis in terms of how they talk about things, and then different spiritual tools. One of the issues with the East is in India in general is there's so many tools. Like people think that there are, a dozen or half a or however many different meditation paths, but just within Tibetan Buddhism alone, literally hundreds, if not thousands of actual cycles that each cycle is like a complete path, right? And so it's not just like a one direction. It's like whatever your aptitude, whatever your personality, like you can find something for you, which can become overwhelming for a practitioner.
Well, this reminds me that Heinrich Zimmer and Carl Jung work very closely. And
Hmm.
Carl Jung popularized a Hindu, I believe it's a Hindu statement that said, there are many paths to the one as
Hmm.
there are people on this earth.
Hmm.
So that
Yeah.
reminds me the infinite number of paths. And also reminds me of something we talked about because you and I both practice in different ways martial arts.
Hmm.
And we are talking about the other day how martial arts can have a family school,
Hmm.
just family method. And I think if you probably can speak to this very as a well-traveled individual that, that, well, I could also give one example of this. When we were in China for a year, I met a student from a small village. And in his small village, they had their own, I would want to say almost like Shintoism in
Yeah.
China, their version of it, where they had a village tree that was holy to them.
Hmm.
So I think when you get into, China and Chinese philosophy and India and Indian philosophy, you find that there's so many different paths, family schools, small schools, village schools, and one elder anywhere, can have a whole entire different school or path.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. So martial arts is a great example of this. In Japan, what happened was, and I love Japanese martial arts, love Japanese culture, all of that. Typically in Japan, like these smaller schools kind of coalesced into larger schools and became sort of like a guild, right? So there's a headmaster, sometimes called the grandmaster, and it's like all sanctioned within that, and then that becomes a source of authority, kind of passing it down, and then there's some variation, but for the most part, it's like that guild model. Whereas in China, there was that model, but not nearly as formalized. And so what was much more popular was like these smaller, what you're talking about, like village or even family traditions. And you can have these amazing traditions of within martial arts, within spirituality that are totally complete, right? And it's like, well, grandpa's grandpa was a monk and he came out of the monastery and taught us this. And these are like typically they're like the distilled practices, whether it's martial, whether it's fighting side or spiritual side or both, or healing side even.
Uh-huh.
And they still exist even to this day. Like there's still people that I know that go out into, rural China and they'll discover these little offshoots or branches of certainly martial tradition, but also of meditative tradition and
Uh,
healing tradition. Even more important, or I would say interesting, is like the healing tradition. You can have these family doctors that they have their own system. It's an offshoot. I mean, it's very similar to traditional Chinese medicine. And traditional Chinese medicine wasn't codified until under Mao, right? It was like, we're going to codify this. We're going to try to make it all kind of one thing. Before that, there was just like a million different ways to do it, all effective, right? So yeah, that village style stuff is so interesting to me.
yeah, there's so many things that you have me thinking about. We could go off on a tangent right now. There's so many different directions I could go with this. But one direction I'm thinking of is that we did meet a local person who had their own qigong business who did learn a family style.
Yeah.
And the reason why that comes to mind, the reason why I bring that up is because this also speaks to the tradition was that family was the center of everything. So if I was a good doctor, I had a good business. I would
Mhm.
protect my business by sharing it with my village or my family or someone who is very close to me, who is very worthy.
Mhm.
And they would have all the secrets. So then they would have a very good business. And it wasn't like we had this public domain of sharing like we do today.
Mhm.
It was very much community oriented, family oriented. And yeah, people would share secrets, but they would also, I believe, and you may speak to this as well, be concerned about who they were sharing with.
Absolutely. And that was true in the medical tradition. It was true certainly in the martial tradition because it was giving you basically a competitive advantage in whatever business you were. Like if you were a caravan guard or a bodyguard or something, you didn't really tell people like the secret sauce for your iron palm technique or whatever it was. Um, Even like recipes for so into iron palm training where you're hardening the palm to be able to not break essentially when you're hitting people, but also to increase energy so you can break bricks and things like that as like a display. There's dit da jiao, which means like punch or fall hit medicine that you rub on your hands after. And there are dozens of different recipes. And each one was like secret, like 100 years ago, that was the secret special recipe of like, white eyebrow system or Shaolin or whatever it is. So it's all sort of there, which is beautiful because some of it is still hidden and still just there to be discovered. Something that's different though about that versus like in the West currently and in Japan to some degree too. It's like the locus of truth was the central system, right? Like it's like unless you get so these family systems, they're like, well, why is our system legitimate? It's because it works, right? Why do we know it works? Well, because our grandpa and his grandpa and his grandpa talked all about it, and grandma or whatever, and we're able to heal, or we're able to fight, or we're able to meditate. So we know. So it's like the validity of the system comes from the efficacy,
Yeah.
whereas like in other systems, if it's a centralized, it's like the validity of the system comes because the grandmaster says it works, like the one true authority. So it's like a decentralized, and because it's decentralized, I think it lasts a lot longer in some ways.
Well, this is really important point to this entire endeavor that we're taking on here is that efficacy. So everything that we discuss here, and we'll get back into some philosophical points that you can try and practice in your own daily life. But everything we try here and discuss here is for you to test in your own life, to see if it works, to see if it helps. So last episode, we're talking about humility and sincerity. And this goes back to the Buddha. Nick, you're very well versed in Buddhism, so you could probably speak to more exactly what the story I'm thinking of is. But the Buddha basically said, don't listen to me, try it for yourself. And this
Yeah.
relates to all points of philosophy.
Yeah.
Try it for yourself in daily life. See
Yeah.
what works. That's the number one takeaway. And Nick and I, you can tell are very passionate about this. And we'll get into a number of different tangents. We're so excited to be together with you on this podcast and go down all these different rabbit holes. But every time we talk about something, is for you to join the conversation and contemplate and see what works in your daily life. And then the great thing is, after some time and we have more feedback, then we can have a little back and forth with you as well to see how you took this information and how you used it and saw it and how it worked or didn't work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the Buddha said something along the lines of like, don't take my word for it. Test all of my words in the same way that a metallurgist would test gold. Like you don't take gold at face value, you test it. And but it's interesting because that's very different than like a modern skepticism, right? Modern skepticism is essentially like everything is like I don't believe in anything other than material world. That's like
Mm.
the base foundation, right? uh, Enlightened skepticism is like, well, that may be true. This person that I respect is telling me that. I'm going to try it out for myself and see what kind of results I get.
Mm.
Usually, actually, somebody was talking to me about this in a group chat that I'm in. And it's like, if you talk to practitioners, if they're doing a certain practice, almost always the practice creates a result, right? If you're trying to do like focusing meditation, you're going to be more focused. If you're trying to do meditations for health or practices for health or whatever it is, you're going to get health. Like the tradition and the practices work if you are able to do them.
Well, what you're speaking to about how people who are stuck in materialism. I once had a student and I had been teaching for 3 or 4 years, and I was surprised I didn't have more of these type of students. But he heard me teach. I like to give more historical background, but let's just say he heard me teach a philosophy that was describing beyond words, beyond
Mhm.
words. And he was saying, "Oh, that philosopher he's just a cop out. He just doesn't want to be held to his words." And that really got me because his specialty, you could tell he was raised and more power to him. His specialty was deconstructing Ben Shapiro. He would mention Ben Shapiro in class, and so he was very skeptical because he had seen all the different ways that Ben Shapiro was very manipulative.
Mm, okay.
So he was using Western philosophy and logic to see and catch people out. So
Hmm.
he took this method to let's say Lao Tzu. We'll introduce Lao Tzu at a different time. But he took this method to a great Chinese sage of Taoism, Lao Tzu, the number one Chinese sage of Taoism. And he was saying that, well, Lao Tzu is just using this as a cop out. He just it's beyond words. Therefore, you can't use my words against me. And then it was a real, oh, how do I address this? How do
Hmm.
I address this?
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, this is so different than Western. Lao Tzu doesn't care if you learn his theory or not.
Hmm.
That's for you to experience and try. Lao Tzu wants to describe the highest level for you. And then you have to go experience. If you want to say, oh, doesn't make any sense to me, I don't believe it, that's fine. But then it's your loss. It's like if someone is telling you go outside and the grass is green,
Hmm.
and then you say, no, I'm not going outside. I don't believe you. Then you missing that experience. So if Lao Tzu is saying the way is beyond words, and I'll tell you 81 chapters, 82 chapters of how to experience that, you say, no, I don't believe you. You said beyond words, you're just tricking me. Then okay, it's just only your loss.
Yeah. I totally agree with that perspective. And in the Tibetan tradition, at least on the philosophical side, we're quite a bit more aggressive than that because we really like to debate. And there's like whole, like many monks, it's like a contact sport, it like sharpens. And so I would say, like, well, forget about the Tao and being beyond words or anything like that. Like, how would you describe the taste of chocolate to somebody that's never had it before? And it's like, it's not possible. I can't give the experience to somebody firsthand that I've had if they've never had that experience. We have a common language because we both experienced that same thing. And so if you, as the practitioner, has never experienced Tao, then what I'm telling you is no word that I can say to you is going to give you the equivalent experience. And so I would say, like, forget about the Tao being beyond words. Like, the chocolate can be talked about is not the true chocolate. So like even that, like yeah,
Absolutely,
yeah, that's
absolutely, absolutely. And that's where in the West we get stuck at, and I basically after that point I developed a whole new unit on this just out of his question, and it was so
yeah.
that's what the great back and forth between teacher and student, right? But
Yeah, for sure. And the same thing goes for like materialism. Like if you really, I know that there are, I have a good friend actually who's basically like a material, what I would consider like a reductive materialist, meaning like it's all just stuff. Like there's nothing past when we die and all that. But that's like such an untenable position because even from like a very conventional scientific perspective, it's like, well, you think you're holding the mug, right? But actually, the mug is just a collection of like atoms and electrostatic
yeah,
forces,
I
and you
love
don't
it.
actually ever touch the mug. So like even from just like sixth grade level science, you're not there's no
Yep.
really no mug. And then it's like, well, I don't believe in things I can't see, and it's like, well, can you see love? Like, can you see the dream? Can you see your hunger? Like, you can't. And it's like, well, I can only experience them. And then it's like, well, how do you know your experience is real? Like when you're sleeping, you don't know that you're asleep and having a dream. So that from your way of thinking, like a dream is just as real as this. So now we've got all kinds of problems because you can dream in the most fantastical way possible. So I mean,
Perfect.
that reductive materialism, or what in Tibetan stuff we call it naive materialism. It's actually called the cow herder's perspective because it's just like not really thought through. It evaporates pretty quickly. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I love that you're touching on Western science too, because energy is neither created nor destroyed,
yeah, and
just in shape.
entropy. Yeah.
And like you're saying, well, you can't see that we're somehow energized. We somehow have locomotion. You can't see where that comes from, but we're here, right? So that reminds me of energy neither created nor destroyed. Also, the one of the most beautiful things that I always come back to as far as science goes, and I feel it links so closely with Confucianism, is Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson. They both emphasized the one of the most important things they ever learned in science was that how we are all stardust,
Hmm.
that you can trace back every molecule of the universe back to the original Big Bang.
Hmm.
This is the most beautiful thing, and it reminds me that heaven is in us as far as Confucius and Confucians had that insight that all of time and space is in us.
Hmm.
All of time and space is in you. And this is where the way between comes in, where all of time and space is in each of us. So we have a way between all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, there's infinite kind of interconnection and time and space. The At least as we're perceiving it is infinite even within the individual. Because if you think even like if you're thinking about an infinite universe, right? And let's just pretend like that's the presupposition. Then it's like, well, where is the center of the universe at any given time? Like you can just pick a random center, and either nothing qualifies as the center, or anything could be considered the center. So like from that perspective, you really are the center of the universe. Your locus of experience is the centrality of the universe, and everything else flows out. And so like in Buddhism in particular, we have this notion of like mandala, which mandala just means circle, right? And so what it actually means in practice is the way that you're meditating as this enlightened being. You visualize yourself as enlightened, and then everything, every experience and everything around you becomes like the circle of enlightenment, right? And so it's like everything is arising from that circle. But the thing is, every other circle is its own, it is its own center too. Actually, it's funny. I have this book right here that's explained. So it's like we're the circle, and then each circle is in our periphery, but that circle becomes its own mandala, right? So it's like
Mm.
interconnecting circles all the way through. Um, yeah, materialism too. Anyway,
That's very beautiful. That's very beautiful. And I think that comes down to that, you know, we are very important. And it's not in an egoistic way. It's that we are very important. That when you take care of your circle, then you are doing the best you can possibly do for the entire universe.
yeah,
And
that's exactly right. Like that's exactly right. And that's why like killing another person, you're basically killing a universe when you kill
yeah.
another person, right? You're killing that version of their universe. And yet one way to think about it is like the world as you experience it is an expression of your deepest level of consciousness, which is both very empowering but also can be sort of frightening. It's like, well, I don't like elements of my experience, is like, well, I don't like elements of my consciousness.
Well, and that's just the principle of the universe is coming towards us, right? So if we are following the principle of the universe, then we will have harmonious experience. If we have something in us or in our mind or in our body that's out of harmony, then we'll have a more difficult experience. And it could come from past karma.
Mhm.
It could come from becoming from, childhood or parents or all sorts of different things, but it's somehow out of harmony. So our job is to kind of endure it and figure out how to get back into harmony. Um, Let me ask you, how do you think we're doing on, because I feel like this is a very natural conversation that in a lot of ways captures the essence of the origin of Indian philosophy, but we haven't contextualized it too much. We talked
Mhm.
about the Vedas. So can you do us a favor and contextualize our conversation in the evolution of Indian philosophy from the Vedas to Upanishads? And I think what we'll do is similar to what we did in Chinese philosophy, kind of lead it up to and imbue Confucianism with sage kings and yin and yang will lead up to Siddhartha Gautama Buddha
Mhm.
with the Vedas and Upanishads and Buddha.
Yeah, I mean, one way to think about Indian philosophy just in general and practices and religion is it went from so it big society level rituals that were beneficial for the individual and for society, and then it became sort of a map for how to live life. And so we get the famous four steps of like what like you become first you're a student, and then you become a householder, and then you become no, I'm missing one. First you're a student, then you're
But
something,
you're right.
then you're a householder, and then
The
essentially
student,
you become a mendicant at the end. Like you
yeah,
then, yeah.
the
What was the
student,
third?
I think it's the student is
Cella? Yeah.
the student is seeking power and knowledge and
Yeah.
connection. Then what you are is Kama Sutra. Then you seek
Oh,
pleasure,
love. Yeah.
love.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Exactly.
householder.
Yeah. Exactly. So then, so you're moving through these stages in life. So it became a guide for that, and there were wisdom and practices, which I think is very similar to Confucianism in a way. It's like, well, where am I in life, and then how might I behave to as best maximize harmony, right? And then so there's that element of it, and then within the context there became this mystical component which became very popular in India. I'm not sure, like maybe more so than most other places. China may be an exception, but it became very popular to have some plug into like the mystical traditions. And that's sort of where, and that 2,500 years ago ish is where Buddha came through, and it was like, well, here is this complete
Yeah.
vehicle to enlightenment and all of that. And then from Buddhism there are a lot of reforms actually, and then Buddhism rose to significant power, probably not total power, but like significant. And then it wasn't until the Muslim invasions around 11th century that kind of destroyed that element of it.
So I think at a later episode, what I kind of envisioning here is we did pre-Confucian philosophy.
Hmm.
Now we're doing pre-Buddhist philosophy. I think at a later uh, episode, we'll actually look at and describe the story of Buddha and the life of Buddha.
Hmm.
And I think next time what we'll do is look at some Western philosophy. But I do want to sit with this and always come full circle back to how these practices can help daily life. So I love that you talked about the four stages of life because they also correlate with the four aims of life.
Hmm.
The way I learned this and heard this, and I'm probably mistaken because it was filtered, so you can correct me, but I do think it's applicable and important for daily life today, is why I wanted to mention it. Because that student orientation is you get knowledge, you network, you gather money, power, and you can do it. It's natural. You want to get your stuff settled and stable. So that student level is like that. Then once you have some power, once you have some stability, once you have some some financial success, right? Then you can look for love.
Hmm.
And then when you're looking for the second stage, once you're looking for love, then we have Kama Sutra. Enjoy and fully enjoy, not Puritan, right? Just enjoy, man and woman, as best as you can. Enjoy, enjoy. And what does that lead to? Baby.
Yeah.
Right? So you have a baby, you have some responsibility. You should make this world very great for your baby. You're in the community, you're a householder. You do everything, ethics, help the community be great for your baby. Then you get old. Guess what? You're gonna lose everything. You're gonna die. Better get ready to be part of what's not gonna be there when you're gone. You better get ready to understand what's beyond the physical, right? So then
Yeah.
your last stage is to try and seek enlightenment. And the reason why I mention this is because in modern life, we have a similar, this is timeless. This is from India thousands of years ago, but it's timeless. We can still see the same patterns in our life. So sometimes I have people who discuss with me and want to say, right now my life is very difficult. I have so much responsibility, my children, my wife. It's true, you're in the householder stage. It's very difficult.
Hmm.
On one hand, though, society should be making it easier for you. Sometimes society is not helping you, and that's part of why it's difficult. But on the other hand, you're also in the thick of it. You're
Hmm.
no longer just enjoying love, you're no longer a student, and you're also not yet a person who can just wander off and retire and seek only wisdom.
Yeah.
You have so many things pulling your energy. I think that's very applicable to people nowadays, suburban parents, or
Yeah.
not just suburban, but parents anywhere can relate to this.
Yeah, it's reminding me of like when I do a lot of work with different kinds of leaders or people that are new to leadership or new to a specific role within leadership. So like if you were coming from a lower level leadership position, now all of a sudden you're the CEO. It's like the things that got you to where you are currently are not the things that are going to get you to the next level. So if you're going to a new leadership position, you have to let go of the old things that, I worked super hard on these projects and I did all these projects and all that. And now you have to be like, well, I can work super hard on those projects, but actually what I need to do is work really hard on being clear and creating my team's accountability, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a different thing. And what happens is when stress starts to happen, we revert to the things that always got us to what that level is in the first place. And that's the exact wrong thing to do. You need to lean into the new skill set that's going to become successful to get you to the next level. So it's almost like a letting go of that old, like, so-called putting away childish things and all of that, to allow yourself to move into the new and stages of life. And I think Confucianism does this very well. It provides the roadmap to like what am I doing? What kind of relationship am I in? And how might I best create that co-relationship to move forward in a positive way?
Well, two things come to mind. 张而不有，为而不辞，公正而夫屈. This is 张而不有. It's achieve, but don't grasp and hold it, right?
Mhm.
为而不辞. Something along those lines. So you grasp, but don't hold it. You don't keep onto it. You achieve merit and let it go. That reminds me of that. That's from Lao Tzu, one chapter of Lao Tzu. That reminds me of that. But also, isn't there a story in Buddhism where you take your boat across to the other shore, and then
Yeah,
once you're on the other shore, you don't take your boat with you, right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. Otherwise, it just becomes a hindrance in and of
Heard it,
itself.
heard it.
Yeah.
Oh man, how is this a good stopping place, you think?
I think so. Yeah, that's
Okay,
great.
very
Yeah.
good, everyone. So I would say just as we're leaving, just think about, having this idea that where you are in life is temporary, different stages and different things serve you in different stages. And of course, that has to do with the element of being able to have maybe non-attachment in many different ways, including in your own inner life, but including not being attached to, for example, well, when I was in my 20s, I really enjoyed love and Kama Sutra. And now I'm in my late 40s and things are winding down in that way or whatnot. And so it's okay, let it go. For one example.
Yeah.
But or
Yeah.
not, or not, but just examples of what things you don't have to be 20. I think our society always wants us to be 20 or 23. And Carl Jung said life begins at 40, the rest is just research,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So, and also when I was 20, part of me wanted to be 40. Part of me wanted to have a house and a career.
Hmm.
So it's really important to appreciate where you're at, appreciate what you have, and also, realize how important your work is and how important your relationships are. Take care of yourself and harmonize with others, I would say. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's good. I think it's very well said. And I appreciate being here again. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Nick, and it's always a pleasure. And thank you everyone so much for finding us and listening to us or watching us. Please always just, like, subscribe, share as we're getting started. This is the very beginning of hopefully a grand endeavor, and we'd love any support in the beginning. It's the most important. Any action you could do to help us comment is really important. So if you can also comment, we'd love to use your input as we discuss here. So thank you so much for joining the Way Between podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. See you later.